What we say is we want everyone to be a stubborn optimist in relation to this. Now, what do we mean by that? What we don't mean is that we need to ignore the reality that we're facing. As we set out clearly in the book with some fairly alarming scenarios that we're facing, we need to reduce emissions by fully 50% inside this decade, or we will lose control of the climatic system and all of the devastating impacts that will lead to for people, for ecosystems, and for future generations. Now, in the face of that, and accepting the reality that no one's coming along to save us from this disaster, either we're going to figure it out or it's going to be as bad as we expect that it could be, what's the right attitude that we bring to that? We should not ignore that reality. That would be deeply irresponsible. But at the same time, if I say to you, we have 10 years to reduce emissions by 50% or we're going to lose control of the system, most people have this little frisson of fear that kind of happens to them. They're like, oh my God, we're not going to make it. What's the future going to be like? What's my life going to be like? What are my children's lives going to be like? That is an entirely understandable response. But what we set out in the book is that's kind of part of our problem. What we face now is an enormous privilege, an enormous opportunity. Those of us who are here now will have more of an impact on life on Earth in the future than any generation that has previously existed. What we do in the next 10 years, these 10 years will be thought about and read about and looked over for hundreds of years to come, either for a very positive reason because we did it, or with a degree of serious resentment and well-placed resentment because we didn't. And what remains of the human race will be thinking back to that time. We live at that fulcrum. And what do you do at that moment? Actually, what we say is if you look back at history, this sense of a stubborn and gritty and determined and realistic optimism is what has pulled us through these dark moments, right? Think back to moments like, Fight Them on the Beaches or I Have a Dream or the suffragette marches or Gandhi's salt marches to the beach. These were really dark moments when an outcome was far from certain. But individuals stood up and said, we refuse to accept that it is beyond our ability to deal with the problems that we've created. And we will, it looked unlikely that they were going to be successful, but they weren't cowed by that. They kept going. And that stubborn, determined optimism, what we learned, because the book partly tells the story of the Paris Agreement that Christiana and Figueres and I were involved in. What we realized in that process of creating the Paris Agreement is that stubborn and determined optimism was not the result of success. It was the cause of it. And actually, if you go back into it, the attitude changed first, and that changed the outcome. So we try to say, let's get our arms around the enormity and the privilege of this moment. Let's enjoy it. Let's face it, and let's embrace it, and let's really do it with a bit of energy and determination. The fear is there. It will always be there, but it doesn't have to define us. This is a privilege. Let's get to it. Let's make it count.
Thank you for watching this video. To listen to the full podcast, click the link in the description below.